All right, we're on. All right, you guys, I am here today with Dr. Stuart Phillips, and he is out of Canada. I am going to kind of let him introduce himself. We spent about, 10 minutes kind of chatting before we got on here, and I told him I was a little intimidated to do this conversation because you guys know me. I'm a low-key, just retired meathead that loves muscle, and I'm aging, so I use these conversations to not only benefit myself, but everybody else. So Dr. Stu Phillips is actually he's a scientist, a professor, and researcher, and so much more. But talks about all things skeletal muscle, lean mass, protein, aging, longevity, that kind of thing. So I'm gonna let you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us where you're at, what you're doing, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me on the show, Pam. Yeah, I'm Stu Phillips. I'm a professor in the Department of Kinesiology at McMaster University, repping the brand here today. Yeah, McMaster's in Hamilton. Sorry?
That's in Canada.
It is in Canada, yes. So it's in Hamilton, Ontario. We are about 70 miles from Niagara Falls, Buffalo, New York. So we're very close to the U.S. border. And I know you're down in Michigan, so we're probably about 2.5 hours drive apart. So really not that far.
No.
I've been here for 27 years now, but I am also a retired, hand on heart. I'm an ice hockey / rugby guy in a previous life. Not that I, still don't try and play ice hockey, but I'm really bad at it. So let's just put it that way, is that my interests in research are really centered and grown out of a love for playing sport, which I did for my entire university career. And now the focus is really on not just skeletal muscle in young people, which was awesome to do that work. And we still do a little bit of it, but more in older populations. I'm the director of what's called the Physical Activity Center of Excellence, which is a community access center for about 500 people in our community that are either seniors, cardiac rehabilitation, cancer patients, people with spinal cord injuries, multiple sclerosis. So I'm interested in trying to keep them as physically active as possible and then aging well. And I don't like to talk about longevity. I talk more about health span and trying to keep yourself independent and moving. And clearly, resistance exercise and weightlifting is part of that.
Yeah, awesome. I love that you have that center, because we kind of connected on that right before we jumped on. Because I'm a intensive cardiac rehab director too, so I think that that's always near and dear to my heart, because I get the privilege and honor, kind of like yourself, to see some of these patients come through that may even be younger than me, my age and older, kind of go through some of these things. And I get to see this kind of different stage of life, because you and I have grown up in our own right with a healthy lifestyle and really a unique interest in muscle that has kind of shaped our careers. But people that come in that just don't understand, the importance of skeletal muscle and even where to begin to do that. So I think that's a little special place to be able to help those people, because they get such great results so quickly when they start to implement just the smallest little steps.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's fantastic to take people like that, and then they have something that they really gives them pause. And so you catch them at a teachable moment and hopefully can say, you know what, you can change your life now after what's happened to you, and really live a slightly different life and age a little bit better and everything. So yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. And so do you have, like, in your programs, are they like weeks long, or do you keep them there? Like you said, it's a community center. So are they prescribed to come there, or?
Yeah. So in Canada, obviously, we have a slightly different healthcare system. So they get government support to undergo a mandatory period. Well, not mandatory. They can do it if they want or not, of cardiac rehabilitation that's covered by the government. And then they can come to our facility and they pay a small membership fee, about $40 a month, to belong. And essentially, we take graduates from the government program, and then we say, okay, well, that was probably just an introduction. We're going to show you how to incorporate this for hopefully the rest of your life. And so what you just went through, you don't have to go through again, and you'll live a better life after we're done with you, basically. And some come and they never leave. They're still members, 10, 20 years later.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they enjoy the atmosphere, because it's a lot of people exactly like them, right? So they feel like it's not, like a box gym. It's really a different place. So they come and never leave. Others, 16, 18 weeks, they're done. They're like, okay, thanks very much. I think I'm good. And, we say farewell and wish them on their way.
So you're like the graduate program
Yeah.
for the cardiac rehab. That's interesting because my patients, we're a 12-week long program because we're an intensive cardiac rehab. So we're not just a traditional, we teach nutrition and all of that. And they always say, and I always say, like, if it was up to me, I'd have you for 6 months or a year because I feel like the magic just started.
Exactly.
That's all we get is 12 weeks. And I tell them, you got to do this at some capacity for the rest of your life. Everything I'm teaching you is so condensed. And they always say, I wish you had a graduate program. I'm like, I wish we did too.
Yeah. We are I guess we're the graduate program. Then we get them a little bit later than you do, I think. And then we hopefully teach them something. I mean, the idea is,
or continue it on, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is how you're going to run your show for the rest of your time.
Yeah. And it's that community aspect that I think everybody's craving, whether they realize that or not, like you said, like-minded individuals and people that may have went through the same thing. It's just that like-mindedness that makes them want to come. So that's really, really cool. I love that. I wish that we could encompass that here maybe someday.
Sure.
Yeah. So I followed you for quite some time on Instagram, Facebook. And in fact, we really connected through, I'll share the story, through a post that I shared that was his. And it was on Facebook and I didn't know how to tag him. And he commented back on it or shared it or something and tagged me. And I felt so bad because, and he's like, listen, it's not a big deal. Like, but I said, I'm so sorry. Like, I never want to be that person that doesn't give people credit. And we actually, so I think that little mishap, we connected through that. And I said, well, I can't tag you if you're not following me. And then he followed me and then we connected on all the platforms. And then that was that. So now I can tag him and now he's on my show talking to all of us. So that's kind of how that happened.
It is.
And so I just want to share that too, share that little story too. Like sometimes the mishaps can connect you with the right people. But his information was so good. And I think what I shared on, and this was one of the big reasons I wanted to come on. So I told you before we got on that I work with primarily women over 35, 40, 50, 60 and beyond in an online kind of fitness space. And of course we teach the basics of nutrition and fitness and that. And you had a lot to say about, and the backing to understand, to explain to us, was about the training around your menstrual cycle and kind of the myths behind that. And I think I don't remember what I shared, but I think that's what I shared because that was a really big interest of mine because it's something that I get asked about, especially as I work with people in perimenopause. Should we be cycling our workouts around our menstrual cycle and why or why not? So I'll kind of let you take that because I know you have kind of a lot to say about that, but that's one of the big reasons I want you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would probably be fair to say that there's a lot of animal data from models where they've taken female rats and they've taken out their ovaries, and so they've got a complete absence of hormones that are associated with ovarian secretion, and they see some pretty profound differences in those circumstances. And so, the only human corollary of that model that would be applicable would be a woman that has a radical hysterectomy, for example. So there's an abrupt change in hormones.
Okay.
What it doesn't equate to is the regular cyclical fluctuation of hormones that are going on throughout the menstrual cycle or transition through menopause, which is not, I think some men think it's just an on-off switch or whatever, and it's not. Some
women think that. So that's
that's true. That some women may think that's how it's going to happen, but not quite like that. And really then trying to dissect some of that. And, when you look at the literature that's out there, and a lot of people are fond of saying that there's not a lot. And I'm like, yeah, but there's not zero either. And some pretty high quality work that we've done as well. There's no difference between menstrual cycle phases for sure. Or if there is a difference, it's trivial. And menopause does bring about changes,
Mhm.
the most conspicuous of which is always manifest in bone, which most women have some knowledge of. But I think the dark secret is that, muscle mass also suffers a little bit as well. And we do know that women postmenopausally tend to lose a little bit more muscle. And it's a little bit tougher to build muscle as well. That doesn't mean that estrogen is an anabolic hormone, which some people subscribe to. We've got data in hand actually that should come out pretty soon that shows that that's not the case.
Okay. Yeah,
So
I've heard that kind of floating around, and a lot
yeah,
of estrogen handed out, based upon that theory, I guess.
right. And so, obviously it's high in the follicular phase, and then the luteal phase, you've got estrogen and progesterone. And the thought is they antagonize each other. But everything that we've seen suggests that none of that really matters. And so we've actually got about 4 studies, one that's ongoing, but 2 others that are ready to go, and one that's sort of ready to go, where we've interrogated that question, and we see absolutely no difference between outcomes associated with one particular phase or another. So, for women who are looking to maximize or optimize or whatever you want to say,
Mhm.
their outcomes, then the phase specific training advice that some women give or some practitioners give has no basis in evidence as far as we can understand and see. So I do understand that some women don't feel great in one phase or another, and that's something different to me. That's a perceptual change, and then you should program your, obviously, whatever it is that you're doing
Mhm.
accordingly. But that's not a physiological reason to do it in this phase, not do it in this phase. It's just, this is how I feel. And I'm like, okay. But we could equally well say, if you have a cold, or if you didn't sleep well, or if you had a fight with your spouse or your kids or whatever, those are other reasons why some people come in and they go, I'm not feeling it today. And you're like, okay, we're going to modify based on this. And maybe that's where the menstrual cycle symptomology sits, I think.
Yeah, and I think you said a key word there is the symptoms. And so you're not dismissing that somebody may not feel well,
Absolutely. Yeah.
tired, and that's a completely different story. But the actual taking time out of your day, your week, your month, to
Yeah.
schedule your strength training days around certain times of your cycle, is kind of
Yeah.
a waste of time.
Waste of time, complete waste of time. Yeah, there's nothing that suggests, like, if you feel like you want to lift and you're good, but the program says, oh, you're in this phase, you shouldn't lift. I ignore that completely.
Yeah, and I guess, and I wanted you to speak on that because, you've done the research and you understand all of that. And for me, just as somebody that prescribes exercise, and
Yeah.
I think it's a big waste of days out of months,
Yeah.
that you could be potentially exercising if
Yeah.
you feel well.
Yeah.
But if you schedule those days off and it's
Yeah.
not necessary, then I feel like you're kind of missing a lot of, I guess, gains for what
Yeah.
you, lack of a better word.
Well, as you say, I mean, I think that, we're going to sort of pull it all the way back and say, first of all, we know that a lot of people don't do exercise at all. So,
Sure.
but then those women that do, we know that not very many of them lift weights. And so,
Yeah.
and then now those that lift weights are being told that they, and they're like, I'm feeling awesome, ready to go. Like, I'm already crushed something. And it's like, no, I'm sorry, you're in the mid luteal phase. You shouldn't lift weights today. And they're like, oh, right. And so
Right.
we put up barriers because, first, and now you're exercising, but you're in the wrong phase. And it's like, okay, as you say, I think it's just a lost opportunity to do something very good for yourself when there's no reason why you shouldn't.
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot of missed days if you count those. If you count how many days there are in a month, it's a
Yeah,
lot of missed days that you could be exercising. So there you have it, ladies. You don't have to schedule them in. However, if you don't feel well and you're feeling fatigued, take a
absolutely.
good look at yourself, check in, and see how you're feeling, and then base it on that. But I always
Absolutely.
suggest do a little bit of movement and see how you can get going.
Yeah, but it's the same thing if you didn't have a good night's sleep, if you
Yeah.
didn't, et cetera, you haven't been able to, or you're not feeling great, or you've been sick, and for all the same reasons that we titrate our workouts. So it's sort of, we call that auto-regulatory feedback, and we teach that to all of our clients downstairs to say, how
Mhm.
are you feeling today? we have cancer patients come in, and sometimes it's not going to work. We've got a workout plan, but they say, like, I'm so flat, like I'm like a 2. And like, we're like, okay, maybe today is just a gentle walk and some stretches and a little bit of conversation. And that's how it goes. So
Yeah, no, I love that too. And I think I even have my clients set like their SMART goals and say, okay, well, if you have a planned workout on that day and something comes up or you didn't sleep well or your kids are sick or what have you, have a plan just in case you can't do that. So like you said, you still come in, you still keep a promise to yourself, but instead of the extensive weight training that you planned, you can just get a stretch or a walk because you still kept your schedule and a promise to yourself. And I think there's something with the follow through that mentally helps us too.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So, okay. So we don't have to plan around that. I'm feeling good, exercise, but if not, then yeah, take a quick break. And I like that you have, you mentioned with cancer patients as well. My sister's a stage 4 breast cancer survivor and colon cancer survivor, and at a very young age. And I always give her this sort of just big, of course she's my sister, but this big umbrella of grace to say, you know what? I know I'm crazy and I love exercise, but just to be healthy, you don't have to be like me. Like you have to be like you, and you have to do what makes sense to you in that moment. And if it's just a walk or just a 10-minute yoga session, then that's what you did. And that's awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. No, absolutely agree.
Yep, I love it. So let's get to the conversation of lifting heavy versus lifting lots of reps, because there's a lot of conversation around that. And I've heard you talk about it, like on your little sound bites. And I think it's an important conversation because even again, and I'll always go back to this, even in my online space, and even just kind of floating around even more. And then of course in the bodybuilding space that I come from, and then, the CrossFit space that I'm affiliated with my husband, lifting heavy is, it's a big conversation, and I feel like there's more emphasis on it now. But I want you to talk about if there's benefits to lifting light and lots of reps too, because I think there's something to that. I think it can still be beneficial, but I don't really have the backing to say how or why or back that up. So let's talk about that. Do we have to lift heavy? And is there benefits to lifting a lot of reps in order to gain lean muscle mass?
Right. So I think I started the conversation again a little bit like when we talked about barriers to why people do or don't do exercise. So once again, a lot of people don't exercise.
Okay, so what's like the percentage of people that don't exercise? Do you know that? Because
again, this is all by self-report. It's very similar for Canadians and Americans, but I think probably about 50% of people basically don't do anything near to the guidelines. And so when we say the guidelines, what that really means is the aerobic guidelines. So 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity, aerobic.
75 vigorous, right? That's
right. 150 moderate, 75 vigorous, and people just, more than half by self-report, so I think it's an exaggeration.
We all like to think we're doing a little more than we are.
We all tend to want to look good in these surveys and everything.
And I think we feel like sometimes we're working harder than we actually are.
Well, there's the self-perception of what's moderate to vigorous, and I think that there's the reality of it. So by all, again, estimates of self-report, you can take that number and cut it not in half, but about a third of that is the number of people that do any form of resistive training. So, and it's called strengthening exercise. And so, and a lot of activities that are lumped in the questionnaire are things like gardening and yoga and Pilates. Now, in their own right, I get it. Like good forms of exercise, activity. There are certain forms of yoga, certain Pilates and Pilates instructors, you would get stronger. But the rate limiting step it's still your own body weight. There's nothing external to that. So let's take a step back and say that the number of people that lift, and I'll call it seriously lift and do it regularly, is a pretty small group. And so my ethos is let's get people lifting. And then let's worry about the heavy versus lighter argument, which tends to dominate things, is if you're not doing this, you're wasting your time. So
Sure.
the biggest risk reduction always comes when you take someone who does nothing and you get them to do something. So, and that's true of aerobic exercise, but also very true of strengthening exercise. So that's my preamble and lead in to say that first, I think that heavy lifting and heavy weights makes you stronger. And if that's a goal of what it is that you want to get out of weightlifting, then you should aim for that. And if you like that, I'm never going to say don't do it. It would be foolish of me to say that. What I will say is it doesn't have to be heavy and all the time. It's simply it's dependent on your goal. So the lighter kind of weight, higher volume is clearly that's the realm of more of the bodybuilders. And, so it's not like you can't build muscle doing that. We know that. But people say you don't get as strong. You don't get as strong because you don't practice lifting heavy weights. If you want to lift and be strong, then lift heavy shit. Like that's the mantra, but it's not necessary. It's sufficient to get you bigger and stronger, but it's not necessary. There's no outcome other than strength that lifting heavy weights is going to sort of give to you, that lighter weights done with a fairly high degree of fatigue. It doesn't have to be full flat out fatigue. People are like, training to fatigue all the time is a waste of time. I'm like, that's what we do in the lab. The real world advice is work with good effort. And really, when you equate those sorts of things, all kinds of benefits happen. In fact, it seems to be that lifting lighter weights, and because you do more work, you get a better ability to regulate blood glucose. Your blood pressure responses are slightly different. Heavy weights, where people Valsalva, your blood pressure, at least transiently, goes up.
Yeah.
So, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. And don't get me wrong, like I've spent enough time in previous lives talking to athletes about how to lift and working individually with these guys and then doing it myself. That's all I did when I was younger. Now I'm looking for smarter ways because my training horizon is, 20 years off in the distance. So I don't have a strength event in my future.
Yeah.
So I lift to be able to lift again tomorrow, and more importantly, next week, and then next month, and next year. So it's all, for me, it's about avoidance of injury. So I might have a personal bias that comes into this to say this is something that, but every now and again, I go in the gym and try and rack up whatever I think I can handle. I generally pay for it the next day, but that's how it goes. It's who I am. And I remind myself, I remind myself, I'm like, oh, that was kind of dumb, but I'm like, so I think it's, when people say you have to lift heavy, I think that's foolish advice. I don't think that's true. If you like it and that's part of your goal as part of your training, then by all means do it for sure.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think my husband can relate with you on that one. Of course, being in the CrossFit industry and him having a bodybuilding and strength and conditioning background, it's always innately in him to, especially as our son gets to lifting. He's 10 and he's getting a little more, got to be a little stronger. And then he'll come back. He's like, "Oh, my shoulder, like I should have done that." It's like, but was it worth it? Maybe.
Here's some advice for your husband, because I'm the father of 3 sons, the youngest of which now is 19, is that the oldest is 25, the middle is 22. And there was a time when I could take them all, no problem. Now, I'm the 19-year-old, I could still get in. If I get in tight with him, I've got him because I've got about 50 pounds on him. But the other 2, I'm like, I don't mess with those 2 guys anymore. But every now and again, we'll go lift and I'll be beside him. I'll be like, I could do that. And then I'm like, no,
I can't do that. Just kidding.
As you say, the next day you're like, oh, why did I do that?
Right. And so me coming back, bodybuilding for so long, and my coach was always, if you want to look like an athlete, you got to train like one. So we
Yeah.
were training with football players and,
Yeah.
doing all the conditioning. We weren't
Yeah.
really, we never really trained us like traditional bodybuilding because
Yeah.
he aesthetically wanted us to have those striations and that muscle maturity and,
Right.
all those things. So I appreciate how he trained us versus the bulk and the cut and, all
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
I did have an injury setback that kind of took me out. But when I was coming back after I had my son and what have you, I really had to kind of find a new way. And just like what you're talking about, to work out.
Right.
And I guess that kind of brings me some comfort in the lifting heavy. Now, I do love to lift heavy. I
Sure.
love being strong. I think it's
Yeah.
super fun to rep out pull-ups as a girl, especially. And those are things that I enjoy.
Sure.
However, when I started to come back, I developed this motto of consistency over intensity because
Yes.
I found more benefit. Because what happened was I tried to get into lifting heavy like I was, and my
Right.
body was like just broken, it felt.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I started lifting 3, 5, 8-pound dumbbells every day, a
Yeah.
little bit,
Yes.
and it benefited me so much more
Right.
than just a couple days a week of really heavy breaking myself down.
Right.
And I did that over, I would say, the past 10 years at this point,
Right.
to really get myself to kind of where I am today
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
but just relearning how to, like you said,
Yeah.
readjust my mind of why I'm doing what I'm doing,
Yeah.
what the real benefit is. And I, as a 42-year-old mom, don't have time to be sore all the time.
Yeah.
I have kids and
Sounds like we're living parallel lives, Pam, because I'm a few years older than you. We won't say how many, but I mean, 20 years hence, it was like, why am I doing this to
yeah,
myself? And it's not the ability to regenerate muscle. I think that continues up until your 60s and 70s. But
mhm,
your joints and the stiffness and the soreness, and as
yeah,
you say, it's like somebody else needs you and needs your time.
mhm,
And I remember my wife saying to me one time, like I'm laying on the couch, and she said, "You're useless to me. Like, why are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, this is not good." And so
yeah,
to your point, um, consistency has become my mantra as well. And it's just, okay, I need to do this so I can stay in the game and
yeah.
keep doing what I like to do on a daily basis. So
And like you
I
said,
get it.
and being independent when I'm 80, my
Yeah.
husband and I joke and, and I'll say, remember, we want to walk the beach when we're in our 80s by ourselves. This is, this is our goal
What a
now.
great goal. What an awesome goal. What an awesome life goal is to have that in your 40s, to have a vision. I call it a vision of your future you,
I love
that is doing something cool like that, right?
it.
And that'll, I think, for a lot of people, that serves you well. So yeah,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
the
And
way to that from lifting heavy weights, you see. So
yeah, but it's just consistency over intensity. And I do joke, and
absolutely.
in my online programs, of course, we have intense days, and we have
Mhm.
days that we like to lift heavy. And I need some, some. I'm looking over at my weights. I have a small little office that I mostly do my workout in. We own a CrossFit gym. I work at a cardiac rehab facility, but I do most of my workouts in my office.
Right on. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I need a little bit. I need some 25s. I need some 50s in here because
Yeah.
I'm getting stronger from consistency
Sure.
over time.
Yeah.
And I just want to be able to challenge myself. So there's a little intensity, but it's consistency over intensity, making sure that I am not sore all the time.
Yeah.
But with that, I do have that question. So, okay, so we can develop and our lean muscle mass
Mhm.
with a lighter weight, higher rep. So if
Yep.
that's you and that's what you like to do, then
Mhm.
let's do that because you're
Yep.
still benefiting your muscles and your bones.
Yep.
Um, but also, is there kind of a benefit in let's say you can lift like 20 reps and then you're at a point where you don't really see any changes. So is
Sure.
there
Sure.
kind of a benefit in grabbing that heavier weight sometimes and kind of mixing up your workouts, doing couple strength days, couple lighter days like that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, all of even the lighter stuff is not just, use the same rep or use the same weight all the time and go to the same reps all the time. We're always talking progression is always still the key. So if you are getting stronger and you want to challenge the system, then you either have to lift a heavier weight or you have to do more volume. And I'm the first to admit that, you know, after X number of sets, I'm going to call it 3. I don't rarely do more than 3, but I just get bored, right? So I'm not talking about doing something, you know, for 3, 5, 6, 7, or redundant sets. I'm not a bodybuilder. I don't subscribe to that. But so yeah, challenge yourself, but also keep it fresh. I mean, change the exercises if that's, you know, I mean, there's, you know, people say this exercise targets this, and I'm like, you know, a curl to me is still just a curl, and it develops your biceps, and I get it, and there are different forms of curls, but there are also things that can keep you fresh. And I think to your point, Pam, like I would absolutely 100% agree that the most effective way to train is mixing these things up, right? And sort of peaking and trying to sort of, you know, challenge yourself. And if you're working towards an event, it's very different because you're trying to get yourself in the top shape for that event, running,
That's a
lifting.
different conversation for sure.
Absolutely.
I think,
Absolutely.
And
so yeah, I'm great with the mix. I think it's a fantastic way. So you still got to challenge yourself. I'm not talking about, you know, curling a pencil 300 times. That, you know, it's still got to be a challenge, right? So it still should feel at the end. I talk about fatigue, and there's, you know, the fatigue where you rack the weight, and there's also the fatigue where you're coming up and your legs are shaking, and it's still fatigue. And so I'm like, you're driving all those motor units and trying to recruit fibers, and it's still good.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you said a key word there too, because we hear a lot, and I talk about a lot of progressive overload, and you said it's just kind of a progression. And so there's different phases and types of progressive overload. There's not just one thing that is progressive
Absolutely.
overload. So talk about
Absolutely.
that for a second. So I guess you kind of did.
Yeah. I mean, it's either most people, when they say overload and they go, oh, it's got to be load. And that's one way of progressing. But if you were doing 1 set, then you progress to 2 sets. If you're doing 2 sets, you progress to 3. If you're working out once a week, you work out twice a week. If you got 2 times a week, 3. It's all about, you know, the stimulus and the if you want to call it total volume lifted gets greater and greater. People argue backwards and forwards what's the best way to do that. We have an analysis that we did. We try to compare all of these things, put them all into one and into models, and we find very little difference. We think greater volume, yes, begets muscle hypertrophy. So the bodybuilders, they've got it right. And greater strength comes with lifting heavier weights. That's as a general statement.
Yeah.
But subtleties and the nuances that people want to program in and say, this is the best, better. We actually find those differences are pretty paper thin. And so, yeah, if you're at the highest end of your discipline and you're looking to, you know, if we're throwing a medal around your neck in Paris this summer, awesome. And there are nuances within nuances, but for most mere mortals, and, you know, I'm squarely in that category, and people I meet on Instagram, or I think most of them are in that category. It's like, get to the gym, work hard, work to a plan that meets your training goals. Overload, absolutely. But if you're just living and lifting for life, then I think your point is the biggest one is consistency.
Yeah, and just change it up as you need to and want to.
Absolutely.
Make sure it's something that you love to do.
All this, like, if you know, people say I want to lift weights, and they bring out a book and they say, I'm going to start doing this. I'm like, you know, a month in, I'm like, how's it going? They're like, I hate it. And I'm like, stop doing it. You know, why would you're never going to keep doing it if you don't like it. So find something you enjoy, for goodness sake. Yeah.
Absolutely, because, and just like I tell my clients, patients alike, is you have to do it at some capacity for the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
So you're kind of building that foundation mentally and physically to do so. So I wanted to kind of get to the next kind of step before we, you know, wrap it up. I feel like this conversation too is really cool because it kind of goes down to don't major in the minors. And you know, and then I think there's so many people that want to be right in these conversations.
Especially on social media, like, and like, I'm fine being challenged on one thing or another, but people come back and I'm like, and they say, they go, you didn't respond to my comment. And I'm like, well, first, your comment's wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to, undo the whatever learning it is that you got. And so I'm just going to ignore it and pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah, yeah, or just not take your time to entertain things that really won't make a difference anyway. And I think you get to that as a level of maturity, right? And
It definitely is a maturation thing. Yeah. In a previous life, probably, 5-10 years ago, definitely, I would, vigorously respond to lots of things. And now I'm like, can't be bothered. It's just, it's
a lot of
largely,
waste of time and energy.
you've only got 24 hours in a day still, right? So
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, we scheduled this podcast months in advance, so you're clearly very busy.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so the benefits, obviously, the biggest thing is to lift weights and that's a big message that you have as a
Mhm.
scientist and a researcher of skeletal muscle. Like, we have to lift weights at some
Absolutely.
capacity forever and ever, and that's going to look different for everybody,
Hmm.
right? And then the next component, of course, we're going to touch on real smallly, is the nutrition component.
Yeah.
So you're lifting weights and you're doing all of these things, and even if you aren't eating in a caloric deficit because you want your body composition to change, it's
Yeah.
still changing when you're lifting weights because you're
Yep.
building muscle.
Yep.
But what's the biggest nutrition component, let's say, to help you maybe lose body fat, because that's a big part of my industry, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think people come to me to lose body fat, but then they hopefully gain, in multiple senses, they gain muscle, but
Yeah.
also gain a new understanding of what health can feel like.
Yes.
But they come to me for body fat. They want to lose body fat. So
Absolutely.
let's say losing body fat and gaining lean muscle mass. What's the biggest nutrition component that you could suggest for that?
Sure. Well, I mean, losing body fat's simple. It's a caloric deficit. People who believe in the carbohydrate insulin model aside, I think there's some subtleties and nuances to it, but tip yourself into a negative energy balance. So expend more energy than you're consuming. And a lot of people say calories in, calories out is flawed or whatever. I don't think they understand thermodynamics, but
Yeah.
that's weight loss or fat loss 101. We've done, I think, 4 weight loss trials now where we've emphasized, because we value skeletal muscle, talking about what we call high quality weight loss. And so, as you say, like
Okay. Yeah.
weight that's lost that's fat,
I love that.
preserving muscle, or
Mhm.
better, gaining some muscle. And a lot of people say, oh, you can't lose fat and gain muscle. I'm like, athletes, especially aesthetic athletes, do it all the time. Like, it's not.
Taking notes.
Yeah, it's absolutely. We've shown it in premenopausal women. We've actually not shown it in peri or postmenopausal women, but stay tuned. We have a study ongoing there.
Oh, good, good. That's lacking, and
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm falling in that window here, and I'm just coming up on it. So I
I
love
know.
that we're kind of in that
I know.
mode where we get to learn so much, and
Yeah,
I'm excited to be in this space right now
yeah,
because there is so much that we get to learn from,
yeah.
and to pass on. So I'm glad that there's some research coming
I,
out about that.
I feel like we've, my hand on my heart, we've not done a great job. We need to do a better job, and we need to generate some data for women that are in that space, because it really is. And you kind of think it's known, right? And I'll be honest, as a guy, you kind of look in and you start reading the literature, and it's like, there's a great big void of data here. So we need to fill that one in. But we've done it in young guys, and so this high quality weight loss, we call it. So the highest possible ratio of fat loss to hopefully lean lost, which doesn't happen in big caloric deficits. We got a whole suite of people out there on these new GLP-1 drugs that I think are losing a ton of fat, which is great.
Mhm. Are
But
they maintaining muscle?
I think they're losing lean as well. They're
Okay.
definitely losing lean. How much of that is muscle, we don't know, but I'm pretty sure that some muscle is being lost.
Yeah.
Flip it in the other direction, and how do we gain muscle? It's the same formula we used when we were younger, and I call it the seafood diet. So you see it, you eat it.
Yeah.
The more food you eat, and the more you're in caloric surplus,
Mhm.
your muscle's in a better a better place to put on mass for sure.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about protein. It's probably in the macronutrient that I've studied more over the last 30 plus years of my career.
Yeah, you're known as the protein guru.
Yeah, the protein guy. Yeah. And I think, my sort of takeaway there is you need to be hitting about 0.7 grams of protein per pound to put yourself in the best possible scenario. You
Goal
can
pound
consume
or
more per
goal
pound.
pound, goal
Yeah.
pound current weight pound.
Current. I don't really make too many distinctions just to make it easy for everybody. You can eat more. A lot of people want to go up to about 1 gram per pound, and that's fine. You just have to appreciate that the benefits really stop at about 0.7. It's not the be all and end all. People think that there are subtle nuances around the type of protein, the timing of ingestion, meal spacing, and all of those are, to my mind, are really, I won't call it majoring in the minors, but I'll just say they're confined to the margins. And so again, for most mere mortals, it's not really a big consideration.
Mhm.
And so get the energy that you need to cover your needs unless you want to lose fat. So, and then get the protein up to about 0.7 grams per pound, definitely more than is minimally recommended. So that's 0.8 grams per kilo. To quickly do the math for you, it's about 0.4 grams per pound. So quite a bit more than
That's the
recommended.
RDA.
Yeah, that's the RDA.
Mhm.
But definitely, once you've done that, then get to the gym, do it regularly, and
Yeah.
things begin to happen. And I think when I check in on, particularly because I have 3 young boys and they were all through this phase of like, I want to get
Mhm.
big, I want to get strong. And you check sort of, a grid of like who's lifting and how many days. That's the variable that most people are not getting right, is that they're just not doing it consistently.
Consistency.
And, you can't, there's no supplement, protein or otherwise, that will get you out of that, lack of going to the gym. Let's put it
Yeah.
that way. So,
So the first thing is lift weights
yeah,
forever and
absolutely.
ever for always.
Lift weights. Yeah, do it consistently. It seems simple, right? But I
Yeah.
think,
For us, it does, but, I'll tell you, just like you said, you have your center where it's very intimidating
yeah,
and it's not what they're used to.
yeah, yeah,
So for our small percentage of community that we have been involved with, it seems very simple. But
yeah,
for some people, it's very intimidating, very scary, and very seems out of reach, but it's not.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's a major, I mean, the barriers to doing this and, doing it regularly. It's easy for you and I to talk, and we think, and it is simple for us.
Sure.
But, so is quantum physics for some people as well. But it's,
Not me.
yeah, right. Well, so I use that analogy all the time. I say, when I teach exercise science undergraduate students, and we talk about things, and they say, why doesn't everybody do this? And I said, well, imagine tomorrow you're going to smoke a pack of cigarettes a day, eat junk food, and you're just going to lay on the couch. And they're like, oh my God. And I'm like, well, that disgust you just felt is how some people feel about doing exercise.
Absolutely.
So just
Absolutely.
try and,
Yes.
walk a mile in their shoes a little bit before you pass judgment on how a lot of people
Yes.
view exercise, for sure.
Yeah, I love it. And before we get off, because you have another meeting here in a few minutes, what's the minimum, I guess, if somebody like that comes into your clinic and
Mm,
your center,
yeah.
and even talking to like my heart patients, what's the minimum amount of protein maybe that they should be getting? Because some of them are not going to get 0.7 grams. They're not.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the minimum has to be the RDA. So,
Okay.
point
Maybe
four
go
grams.
a little above that, like aim for a little niche.
So the biggest meal we find where people miss protein because this is the way they've been educated, and the average age of people in this center is about 73,
Mhm.
is
That's
breakfast.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's very carbohydrate centric, very cereal centric. And we have, like, so March is nutrition month. It's about to end, but we have lots of information about, it's okay to eat an egg, for example. They're off the dirt list.
Sure.
But this is a generation that was raised to, that the cholesterol in eggs cause high cholesterol, and that was
Yeah.
bad because of heart, so we take that off of the, bad list, and we say permission to have an egg. Greek style yogurt has become a really great breakfast food for higher protein. We
So
like people to aim for higher.
I say even getting maybe adding that 10 to 20 to 30 grams at breakfast would
Yeah,
significantly raise their overall protein consumption for the day for people that aren't getting
exactly.
any protein. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that first meal, that breakfast meal is sort of, and Don Layman is really big on this concept. It's a patterning meal for the rest of the day. So it kind of kickstarts the protein synthetic process and building
Mhm,
new protein. And if that's, only meal number 3, which is where most people, the dinner time meal, where people get most of their protein,
mhm.
that's a little too late in the day. So that first
Sure.
meal, that breakfast meal, I think is a pretty important one
Super
if you're going to
important.
really focus on getting more protein in your day.
Yeah, easy. I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on
My
and
pleasure.
chatting. My other protein friend, I know you know Alan Aragon. He's been on.
Okay.
He's
Yeah,
a big protein guy.
for sure.
I know that's not your favorite subject to talk about. Maybe sometime you guys should come on and we should talk about protein and all the
It's
nutrients, and that would be a fun
yeah.
conversation.
It's great. I mean, I love talking about protein. I think
Yeah.
it's sort of been, I'll call it out and say it's been overblown in terms of its importance because, our data suggests that it is important. But the
Mhm,
analogy I like to use is that consistently going to the gym, eating, a mixed and fairly, I'll call it balanced diet. I know
mhm.
everybody gets all twisted about that, but
Yeah.
that covers your energy needs, that bakes the cake. And
Yeah.
then, you know, protein and all of the other stuff is sort of a thin layer of icing on top. Not that it's
No, I
not
love it.
important, but going to the
I love
gym is,
that. Yeah, I love that
taking the
you
cake.
you emphasize the weight train. I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I know we're limited in time. But I love that your big message is that yeah, we need to worry about protein, but we don't need to worry about it
Yeah.
as much as it's hyped up right now because it's
Yep.
always something new. It's always something different. It's
Yeah.
always something new.
Sure.
Before it was low carb and then it was low fat and low carb, and now it's the protein message.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, I think I stand with you on the hill that I'll die on is that we just need to lift weights.
We can
And
both die on that hill.
yes,
That's a fine hill to die on. I'll die on that one for sure.
yes, for longevity and those
Yes.
phases and stages of your life will change. And how we get that muscle might change slightly, but we have to do it some capacity forever and ever.
You got
And
it.
yeah, so awesome. Thank you so, so, so very much. This was a fun conversation.
My pleasure, Pam. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah. So have a wonderful day. And you guys make sure that you guys follow him on Instagram. I think he's on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter. It's too much for me. So
It's all
just,
good.
you guys can follow him on Instagram. You're on Facebook.
Yep.
And then you guys can look up all his information. So make sure that is a main mission of mine here in my conversations is that we follow the appropriate people for the appropriate information because Lord knows it can get confusing out there and it shouldn't be.